Testing 1, 2. We're getting echo a lot. Testing, 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 testing. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2.
Welcome, brothers and sisters. Our next service will begin soon. We invite you to take your seat and sing along or simply enjoy a wonderful song by artist Phil Wickham called Living Hope.
How great the chasm that lay between us, how high the mountain I could not climb. In desperation, I turned to heaven and spoke your name into the night. Then through the darkness, your loving kindness tore through the shadows of my soul. The work is finished, the end is written. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Who could imagine so great a mercy? What heart could fathom such boundless grace? The God of ages stepped down from glory to wear my sin and bear my shame. The cross has spoken, I am forgiven. The King of Kings calls me his own. Beautiful Savior, I'm yours forever. Jesus Christ, my living hope. Hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Hallelujah, praise the one who set me free. Hallelujah, death has lost its grip on me. You have broken every chain. There's salvation in your name, Jesus Christ, my living hope. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your buried body began to breathe. Out of the silence, the roaring lion declared the grave has no claim on me. Then came the morning that sealed the promise. Your buried body began to breathe. Out of the silence, the roaring lion
Test, test. Okay, we're ready to go. I've asked Ben McLean if he would start us off with a prayer. So I don't see a traveling mic. So if you could. Whoa.
Our Father in heaven, I pray that your Spirit would be with us in our class and service today, that we would have our minds open to the truth, and that you'd inspire our brother who's teaching this. And I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Once again, great to be with you. This morning we're going to talk about, on the next chapter of specifically truth and what happens when we have an absence of truth. So if we could pull up the slides. The second part of the class is why kingdoms fall. So we can go over what we talked about last time while we pull that up. Last week we talked about what money is, if it's important, why it's important. And like I said last week, money, I didn't talk at all about how to make lots of money, how to spend your money. I don't super care about that. Don't find it to be terribly interesting or even all that important. Okay. This doesn't seem to be forwarding to the next slide. But like I said, I don't think money is all that terribly interesting other than what money is. So here's our week one review. Linda gave me notes that my font is too small, so I apologize for that. Money is a technology. It's meant to speed up transaction, to limit the friction between people and their transactions. So money is a technology that allows users, owners, to transmit value creation across time and space. Last week we talked about that money has to be able to move across time, meaning it can't rot away like an apple. In the example we used, apples can't function as a money because the value we create for someone else by providing goods or services, that has to be durable. It has to be intact. It cannot rot away like an apple. We also have to be able to transmit this value that we create over space, meaning it can't be in one location, which would limit our ability to transact with it. So, like land would not be a good money because I can't move land from Russia or from China or from Louisiana into Missouri where someone, one of the people here might want to buy it. So apples don't function as currency or a good currency because the value will be destroyed over time. And land won't work as a currency because I can't move it over space. Those are two of the most important criteria of what a money is. God demands that we use honest money and scales in transacting with others, or else we will go back into bondage. And we use the scripture from Leviticus 19:35 through 36, which is, ye shall do, and I should remind that this scripture, this wisdom was given to the children of Israel after escaping Egypt, and it's God telling them how to interact with each other. And he gives them a whole list of all these ways they should interact with each other. At the very end, he says, ye shall do no unrighteousness in judgment, in meat yard, in weight, or in measure. Just balances, just weights, a just ephah, and a just hin, which are units of measurement, shall ye have. I am the Lord your God, which brought you out of the land of Egypt. This is God saying, if you adjust the weights, the measures, if you manipulate the money, if you manipulate the scales, you're going to go back into bondage, which I just pulled you out of. But this bondage won't be the Egyptians. It will be each other. So God giving them warning on how to interact fairly with each other, that truth has to be involved in every aspect of every interaction of our lives, or else we are either going to go back into bondage or we're going to put our brothers and sisters into bondage. And that truth is the key ingredient in society. If truth is absent, society is in bondage. John 8:31 through 34. Does anybody have that ready to go? This is a review from last week. Right up here. Right up here.
Then said Jesus unto the Jews which believed on him, If ye continue in my word, then are ye my disciples indeed, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. They answered him, Be we Abraham's seed, and were never in bondage to any man? How sayest thou, ye shall be made free? Jesus answered them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is a servant of sin.
This is interesting because everyone knows, like I said last week, everyone knows the one verse, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. It's the one below that we don't talk about as much. These men are saying, or Jesus says, you have to know the truth, and the truth will make you free. And they say, we are already free. We're the sons of Abraham. We're the descendants of Abraham. We've never been in bondage. And Jesus says, basically, are you living in sin? Are you living in a society that lives in sin? Then you're in bondage and you don't even know you're in bondage. Go ahead, Ben.
I was going to say, Jesus didn't give the easy, the rhetorically easy but politically risky response, which is, you're in bondage to Rome. That's what I think a lot of his supporters at that moment would have liked to have heard.
100%. Yes, they were, the Israelites at that time, they 100% wanted to go to war to Rome. They did not want to be under the oppression of Rome. And I think that Barabbas was the perfect, counter to Christ, in that he tried to start an insurrection against Rome. He murdered someone and tried to start an insurrection, which is why they wanted to release him and not Jesus. So basically, Barabbas was everything that they wanted Jesus to be, but he refused. He would not compromise on his ethics. So, like I said, we're going to talk about why kingdoms fall today. Isaiah has something interesting to say. Isaiah 1:21 through 22. How is the faithful city become a harlot? It was full of judgment, righteousness lodged in it, but now murderers. Thy silver is become dross, thy wine mixed with water. So Zach touched on what dross is a little bit last week. Dross is counterfeit money, essentially. Dross is, they would have a silver coin that might be like 90% fine silver. The problem with 90% fine silver is that that's a finite resource. There's only a certain amount of it, so you can't manipulate it. So what you do is you start adding other alloys, other chemicals. A common one back then was tin. Tin was abundant. You could get it anywhere. It was cheap. Didn't have all the good qualities of money like silver did, but you could combine them together and pass it off as a silver coin. So that's what they did. They passed off this silver coin as having all the qualities of a good money, but it didn't. It was tin. It was fake. It was counterfeit. It was a lie. The truth between the parties transacting in this had been broken. That's something really important to say. I don't know if he's necessarily just talking about currency or he's talking about the hearts of the people here. He might be talking about both. That you proclaim to be one thing, you proclaim to be fine silver, but you're actually full of dross. You're full of tin. So, like I said last week, we're going to talk about the Roman Empire somewhat in this Why Kingdoms Fall. Hopefully I bring this all around at some point. I think that One of my primary concerns was that once again this week people would be thinking, what are we talking about here in a Sunday school class? But right now we're going to talk about the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire peaked in 117 AD. You can see how far it reached here. Pretty impressive. It's not nearly as impressive as like the Mongols or something, but it's pretty impressive. And Rome was the center for learning. It was the center for commerce. It was the center for science and trade, all this cool stuff. So why did it fall? What happened in Rome that led to its fall? Turns out there's lots of things. One of the most important things was that their silver became dross, just like Isaiah talked about. In 250 BC, they started to introduce silver. They called it the denarius. And at this time, it was 90% silver. You can see it up in the, You can see it up in the top corner. That's the denarius. It was 4 grams of silver. And they maintained this silver reserve currency for hundreds of years. And you could see that the society flourished. Like we talked about last week, the scales were balanced. Everything was fair. When someone told you they were giving you a silver piece, you knew exactly what you were getting. The problem, and we'll see this later, is that when societies start to slow in their expansion, they have to start printing money to make it look like they're still growing. We see this all over the world today. This is not unique to Rome. So Nero, who realized that he wanted to do more, he wanted to create more social programs, he wanted to expand the Roman territory, he started to debase the currency, which means he started to make more of it. The only way you can make more of a finite resource is to turn it to dross. Is to start putting tin and other things into this silver. And you can see this happen around 50 AD, where Nero began debasing the denarius. And he took it from just under 4 grams of silver to just under 3 grams of silver. The problem is, once you start this, you can't stop. You have to continue to debase the silver. So you can see it goes from 4 grams of silver in 250 BC to barely any silver in 275 AD. Does this have... Go ahead.
I guess you're leading to our money, which used to be silver, quarters and 50-cent pieces and all of that, and pennies were copper, and now we don't have any value in our money at face value.
We'll get there in like 10 minutes. We're going to cover all of that. Okay, so we can see that the silver has become literally dross. It went from 90% silver to less than 2% silver. Does this change society? Does this change people? So we saw that denarius debased the silver starting in 64 AD. And how weird, they found more money so they could start to create more social programs, and they could actually start building lots of large projects. The Colosseum began construction between 70 AD and 72 AD, so only a few years after the silver became dross. This sounds nice. This is a manipulation of the money. This is creating currency out of thin air and building things that you want to build. But what you're actually doing is you're extracting the value creation from the people who have the silver, and you're doing with it whatever you want. This is a terrifying thought for society, that the government can extract your value that you want to use for your own things and do what they want to do with it. So they built the Colosseum, 70 AD and 72 AD, and then there's the Cura NNA, which is like, this is like free bread that they would give out. This is an older program, but this is free bread that they gave to everyone, which I should say I'm not taking a political stance on any of these things. I think I'll take a political stance on food stamps. I think food stamps are one of the best ways to spend government money. But other than that, I'm not going to be taking any political stances. I'm just telling you what happened. So there's a poet named Juvenal, I think that's how you say his name, who said that you could basically do whatever with a society. You can manipulate them in any way as long as you provide them bread and services. 74 AD took them off the silver standard. 70 AD gave them entertainment. And around this time, they also started giving them free bread. Because they gave them all of that, they could manipulate the people in whatever way they wanted. And they did. So Rome continued to, after 117 AD, it started to contract for lots of different reasons. This is only, 60 years after the start of the debasement by Nero. So they were able to pay military. They had to fortify the perimeter of their territory to protect against the barbarians. Military were paid very well. They were paid similar to a craftsman at the time. So they had to pay a lot of money to the military. The mines of all these conquered territories that they had taken began to dry up. That was kind of how Rome funded all of this. They would expand into a new territory. They would prop up a puppet government and say, now you pay us taxes, and we're also going to plunder all your precious metals and resources. They're now ours. That's how they funded this. Well, once all those resources are gone, there's no other way to fund expansion. You do have to protect your territory from the barbarians, but you're not getting any new income or resources from this. So expansion stopped and started to contract, and they had to pay all these mercenaries to protect the border. The problem was that mercenaries were more expensive, and once they started to realize, oh, the denarius isn't worth what it used to be, then either they stopped working for the Romans, or some of them even went to go work for the barbarians. It was actually a group of former Roman mercenaries that sacked Rome because they had been unpaid. 286 AD, Rome was split into two empires to stabilize. Constantine actually returned them to a gold standard later and stabilized the eastern side. But the Western Roman Empire fell in 476 AD, and when it fell as a shell of its former self. There was a pretty steep decline in the Western Roman Empire from lots of different things. Mostly, if you were to summarize a pretty short list of why it fell, it was mostly that there was sky-high inflation, the currency had been broken, large military spending, they contracted, they couldn't push out into other areas to get their resources, and there was social unrest within Rome. People started to realize, oh, this isn't fair, this isn't right, something is wrong, and so there was lots of social unrest within Rome. Are there any similarities to what we're going through today? There's a former CEO of Bridgewater Associates, the largest hedge fund in the world. His name is Ray Dalio. He economist and historian, and he says, we always think that everything that we go through is unprecedented, when in reality we've seen it many times throughout history. We weren't alive during it, but we've seen it. So this is the rise and fall of superpowers that we've seen many times throughout history. Rome is certainly part of this. I'll let you look at it at your own, just on your own. But Rome went through a similar thing, and the United States is going through at least part of this. Debt bust and economic downturn, printing money and credit, revolution and wars. Does that sound familiar? Deb?
Yeah, and right here I'll interject that on my first missionary trip to Africa, we came back through Rome. We flew Air Italia, and we had a layover, and this was pre 9/11, This was like 1997, and we were able to leave the airport. Didn't have to show anything to anybody. Grabbed a train, went into the center of Rome, and then walked to the Colosseum. And one of the things is we heard the stories about what took place in the Colosseum, and kind of what you're talking about here in terms of the fall is we see when societies fall, their entertainment has given an indicator of what and where they are. And in the Colosseum, they had a lower area below ground where they had lions. And then as the guide graphically told about the fact that the lions would that there would be a lion placed in with a person, and it almost is amazing. I mean, to be there and think that you could actually want to see a human being placed in an auditorium with a lion with very little defense. That shows a depravity. And so when you're making comparisons between where we are as a nation now and the very area of entertainment, we see a correlation between us and Rome and the fall of civilizations.
Absolutely. So why are we talking about this on a Sunday morning in church? One of the reasons is that this is something I understand. This is something I've studied pretty extensively and have a pretty good understanding of. However, it's just one of many attack vectors where truth can be diminished. It's just one area where truth can be removed. It's just the one that I understand. Also, this is one area where we can be put into bondage. And just like in John, they say, we've never been in bondage. We're free men. And Jesus said, actually, you've always been in bondage. You can't resist something unless you understand that it's happening. So, now we'll move on to the United States, just like we talked about with the currency. So I'm going to not talk about the history of currency. Before 1944, it was pretty stable before then. But we'll do 1944 to basically now. So 1944, the World War II is almost over. The United States is an absolute superpower, primarily because two reasons. One is that one is that we are involved in World War II, but we're not on fire like all of Western Europe was. So we became the manufacturing powerhouse of all of World War II, or 2/3 of the ammunition and things in World War II were made in the United States. And we shipped them over there. So they're buying all these things from us. They're buying things from us, and we buy gold with all the funds that we get from the war. So I know that, Pearl Harbor, an attack did take place on U.S. soil. It was not in the mainland, and it was relatively small. Not unimportant or anything, but relatively small compared to all of Western Europe that was basically on fire at this time. So U.S. manufacturing powerhouse, we didn't have an attack or battle on the mainland, and we were buying gold with all of this. So at the end of World War II, 44 allied countries, came together in Bretton Woods. I think it's in Massachusetts. It's a city in Massachusetts, I think. Bretton Woods. And they said, okay, the world is on fire. How are we going to put it out? How are we going to recover economically? And what they decided on was that the 44 allies would peg their currency at a fixed exchange rate to the U.S. dollar. So this is kind of like the redemption notes that we talked about last week, but you could redeem your native currency for U.S. dollars at a fixed exchange rate, so nobody can manipulate the money. The U.S. dollar would be pegged to gold at $35 per ounce, so the U.S. could not manipulate the money, and only foreign central banks could redeem U.S. dollars for gold. So a citizen in England could not redeem either their native currency or US dollars for gold, but their central bank could. This is a pretty good economic policy. At least everyone understands it. It's a pretty hard money, which is good. The scales are pretty balanced. That's good. It also puts the United States in a serious position of power, which historically has been pretty good. Not perfect, but pretty good. Lyndon Johnson, I know I don't have it on here. Lyndon Johnson became president. He started the Great Society, which had lots of social programs in there, one of them being Medicare, one of them being Medicaid, lots of other social programs around national parks and urban housing and things like that. And like I said, not taking a political stance on these things at all. Not at all. But they require money and monetary flexibility. So they didn't necessarily like the rigidity of Bretton Woods after all this. It's also important to note that the Korean War began. Lots of money was spent on that. Again, not taking a political stance at all, just saying these things require money, and raising taxes is not politically popular at all, so you have to find another way to get the money. So one way that they did it was the Coinage Act of 1965. This eliminated silver from dimes and quarters completely. They became tin. Does that sound like anything we've talked about this morning? The denarius going from 90% silver to 2% silver. But this went very quickly from, I'm not exactly sure what the finest was of the dimes and quarters, but to 0% silver. The half dollar went from 90% silver to 40% silver. And then in 1970, went to 0% silver entirely. So now they had 100% control of coins in the United States, the printing and distribution of coins. They could make as many of them as they wanted. They could use any metal that they wanted. And they basically said, this has value because I say it has value. Print. Then in 1971, before this, specifically in England, their prime minister said, you know what? I think the United States has been printing money this whole time that is not backed by gold. I think that they printed more money than they said they would. And so there was this hysteria, and all these central banks began redeeming, they began selling their US dollars and taking US gold. Selling the dollars back to the United States and taking gold. This was a problem, because he was right. The United States had been printing money, and it wasn't backed by gold. They had more currency in circulation than they had gold in their vaults. This was a big problem, because if there was a bank run on our gold, we could not meet our liabilities, and the United States would go bankrupt. So in 1971, Richard Nixon said, we are no longer honoring the US dollar as a redemption certificate for our gold. This is huge, because now the United States has permission to print whatever they want. This is a deviation, and it perfectly parallels what we saw in Rome. So hopefully I haven't bored you too much with it. But like I said, we have to understand the attack vectors for truth so we can resist it, so we understand it, so we can combat it. So what happened after this? I'll try to go through this quickly. We saw that every single currency debased against gold. Every currency became worth less, because if you can manipulate the money, you will manipulate the money. It will happen. Do we have somebody?
My great-grandfather was a rich man, and he used to carry $20 gold pieces around with him. You know, and that'd be very rare to see one of those today. I've seen the $5 silver certificate. My dad used to have one. He showed it to me. But now even the pennies are not full copper anymore.
Yeah, I think that if you can find a dime from like pre-1965, I think they're worth like $1.28 in silver now, that shows you at least some about how much it's debased. So in the first graph on the left, you can see that every currency has fallen in value to gold. To the right, you see that currencies from around the world started experiencing crashes. As soon as we got off this hard money standard where the scales were balanced, our weights were balanced, as soon as we left it threw the world into turmoil. And this is U.S. national debt from 1900 to 2020, and it's higher now. Once you leave this hard money standard, you can do whatever you want. It's very easy to raise debt. It's much less politically popular to increase taxes. So what else should you do if you can't increase taxes? You just print more money. So here's the U.S. federal surplus or deficit. You can see in 1970, that's when everything went crazy. We pretty much stuck to this surplus deficit where we tried to maintain a zero budget, where we weren't taking on much debt. We had some good years during the dot-com bubble back around 2000. Much easier to do then. But after 1970, when you leave a hard money standard, then chaos ensues. People can manipulate the money. And so, if they can manipulate the money, they manipulate you. This next area is what is most important. So all the stuff that I prefaced with, yeah, it's important, it's interesting, but how does it impact you? All of you have been manipulated one way or another by leaving a hard money standard. You might not believe me. Give me like 10 minutes. I promise you will find out how you have been manipulated by leaving a hard money standard. One of them being in 1971, you can see the arrow here on the graph on the left, is that productivity has increased since 1971, and yet compensation, the line in red, has not. At least not as much as productivity has. If you look to the graph on the right, you'll see that the 20th percentile, the blue line, those are the lowest earners. Their income gains have not been all that high. Median level, the gray line, hasn't been that high. But the 95th percentile, their incomes have gone up significantly. This is due to how we introduce money. This is called the Cantillon effect. I can't go into it now, but it's called the Cantillon effect. It creates a ruling and a servant class, basically. So if you don't believe the first two, here's how incomes have grown or fallen. Sorry, mostly just grown. From 1920 to 2010. And you can see the green line, that's the bottom 90% of earners. The red line is the top 1% of earners. And you can see in 1970, bottom 90% of earners, their income has stagnated in real terms, so adjusting for inflation. But red, top 1% has gone up significantly. This is what happens when you leave a hard money standard. Everyone in this room has been manipulated in one way or another from this. Consumer Price Index, 1775 to 2012. So this doesn't even include the 9.1% seed print that we just had this last week. Everything has gotten more expensive because we print more money. Starting, we saw a big hockey stick up in 1971. Cumulative inflation. From 1913 to 2015, everything has become more expensive. Why does this matter? Does it impact how we see the world? Does it impact how we interact with each other? They answered him, "We be Abraham's seed, and were never in bondage to any man. How sayest thou, ye shall be made free?" Jesus answered them, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is in the servant of sin." He's saying you're in bondage even though you don't know that you're in bondage. So how have we been changed by this? Well, we can see here that the blue line, this is the market capitalization by sector. That in 1971 we saw a pretty steep incline in the financial sector. This is how much of our economy is from the financial sector. So we saw people start to study finance and economics more. They chose their job to go into finance and economics more. It was me. I did that. I didn't know. I don't know if this impacted my decision or not, but that I'm one of those people. So we see people start to gravitate more towards studying and working in finance and economics. And 1971 likely played a part in it. So, cost of housing. On the left, you see the green line, home value going up. The blue line is income change. Home values have gone up, but incomes have not. The bar graph on the right, how long does it take to save for a house? In 1970, it was 2.4 years for an average income to buy an average house. In 2020, it was 6.9 years. It's higher now. Has anyone been manipulated by this? Age of their first marriage. In 1970, the average age for a woman was about 21. For a man, it was 23. In 2019, it was 28 for a woman and 30 for a man. Society has changed in ways that we haven't necessarily understood. Why is this? One of the primary reasons is that they want to be financially stable. This is hugely important to people. And so we're getting married later than we used to. Is that not some sort of manipulation? Age of first-time mothers. In 1970, it was 23.7 years. That was the average age of first-time mothers. In 2018, it's 29. I was 29 when we had our first kid. And the primary reason is that we wanted to put money away and we wanted to be financially stable. I'm the perfect example of this. Not that I'm a mother, but everything else. There's a manipulation of society because we have left, at least partially, a hard money standard. And to be able to resist it, we have to understand it. And this could be somewhat controversial. It's just data, though. So, the dual income couples. In 1970, it was 47% both couples working, or both spouses working. In 2010, it was 66%. It's gone up since then. In 1970, 38% was the husband only working. Now it's 21%. And then 2% for wife only working and 7%. So I should preface this by saying that my family, Christina and I, we have been all three. We were both spouses working for like 10 years. Purple line. The green line, we've been for about a year. And then the wife only working we were also that during COVID for like 6 months where I was unemployed. So we've been all three. And I have no problem with you choosing any three. But the primary reason why both spouses are working is because they're not financially stable unless both spouses are working. If it's your choice for both spouses, that's great. I support that. If it's not, then you're manipulated. This changes the family structure. This changes the stress placed on marriages. All because incomes have not grown, prices have, because we've left a hard money standard. Divorce rate by age. 1970, look at that. You could see quite a deviation for all ages. Mostly, I can't say mostly, partially because finances put such a stress on marriage. And if you're struggling, which we've seen the data that real wages haven't grown at the same rate as prices, that puts such a stress on marriage. And we can say, I don't know if this is really changing society. I would argue that the combination of all these different things would prove the manipulation of society. Not necessarily a nefarious manipulation, not that they're trying to do it, but this is what happens. So health impact. We see, so a concept is that as prices go up, but wages don't, if it's a good that you're primarily depending on most of society or the low to middle income class, you can't raise the price because you're pricing them out of your good or service. So you have to use lower quality ingredients or find some kind of efficiency. So we see this deviation in 1970 where we're not using refined sugar so much. Instead, we're using high fructose corn syrup. And to the right, you can see that in 1970, we started to see an increase in obesity across all ages. This is a manipulation of our own health. We have a manipulation of the government debt and spending. We have a manipulation of families when they start to have families, how many children they have, and now we have a manipulation of our own health. Incarcerations. You can see here that the rate of incarceration jumps. This is where it starts to get a little scary. When you start to see that people are losing hope in this broken society. People get desperate. And when people get desperate or they feel that things are unfair, social unrest, which is one of the criteria that we saw in the curve from Ray Dalio about how kingdoms fall. A spike in incarcerations. Political polarization. You can see 1970, conservatives became more conservatives and liberals became more liberal. We've become a very polarized society when we haven't always been that way. Another manipulation. And I think the last two kind of encapsulate everything that I've talked about. That in 1970, you can see a spike on the yellow line. This is the percent of people saying that the economy is the most important problem in an election. What does this mean? This means that we are willing to compromise on other issues as long as we have a healthy economy. This is manipulation of the highest order. That we're willing to compromise on our values, what we believe to be true, what we believe to be virtuous, so we have more money, because the money's broken. I hope that the importance of this sinks into you. And this perfectly encapsulates everything I've said. And to me, this is incredibly traumatic. Personal priorities. You can see in the blue line, that is developing a meaningful philosophy of life. Look how important that was in 1970. Look where it is in 2015. What did it trade places with? If you look at the green line, being very well off financially. 1970, it was only 35%. 2015, it's over 80%. Is there a better graph that encapsulates where we are as a society today? That people are no longer worried about what provides meaning in life, and they're willing to trade it for money. This is heartbreaking. All because we've left a hard money standard. All because we've created more of a ruling and servant class. And now people are willing to compromise on their ethics for money. They're willing to focus less on a philosophy of life that provides meaning and purpose and exchange it for, I just want to be well off financially. This is a collapse of a culture founded on Christian principles. And I bring this up because we have to, go ahead.
It boils down to people want to feel safe and secure. And the statement of Benjamin Franklin, if I remember, if he's the one that said it, if you exchange your freedoms for security, you'll get neither.
Yeah, absolutely. But when we think about the changes that have to take place in our hearts, in our communities, in our families, in our churches, and we see this, it's heartbreaking. That one, we're willing to compromise, and two, we're not even seeking after necessarily meaning or purpose. We're just chasing dollars. Like I said, this is heartbreaking. In college, specifically, I had several friends who would say, I'm not religious, I'm not a Christian, I just try to be a good person. Lots of people, actually. More, I don't know, probably dozens. Is it possible to do that after seeing what we've seen up here? Is it possible to try to be a good person? What is a good person when all these things have been manipulated? When the silver has become dross? Is it even possible? I know in a sermon a few weeks ago I talked about the rate of church attendance, synagogues, mosques, churches across the United States. For the first time in the history of the United States, the minority of Americans regularly attend church. It's at 47%, where it hovered at 70% between like 1940 and 2000 or so. But now we're at 47%. Our priorities have changed from meaning and purpose to being safe, as he said, and being financially stable. Is this healthy? Good.
I wonder if you have something on the birth rate, because we're not sustaining our birth rate anymore in the United States.
That's true. One of the things Elon Musk talks about a lot. So, Mom?
Another perhaps more subtle manipulation that it wouldn't hurt to take a look at is entertainment, and how that has shifted from things that portrayed core values that we would espouse to not so much, in fact, anti. But we all work really hard to make ourselves feel like we're a good person, and so we will employ different thought patterns or different biases to do that. One of them being like the reality shows on TV today, which I don't know much about them, but I think that the premise of them is to make us feel better about ourselves, or at least I'm not as bad as that person. Well, at least I don't do what that person does. Oh, they're horrible. Or, it's kind of like watching a train wreck. But when we look at that and compare ourselves to that, then we might feel pretty good about ourselves. But when we compare ourselves to Jesus, the true standard, the person that should be manning the scales, then we only have value in him, not in ourselves. And we're not better than anybody else.
Absolutely. It's the silver has become dross. Like I was talking about how many people say, I just want to be a good person, I'm not religious, just be a good person. That has no meaning. That changes from generation to generation unless we're actually looking back at the Bible, at the life of Christ, at the Beatitudes, at what he taught us. That is the only standard we can hold ourselves to, because what we consider to be silver today is dross. It is tin. It has been manipulated. It has been changed. And unless we understand what it is, we will also be manipulated. So I'll go through this last part quickly. So I was listening to an interview by a guy named Peter Thiel. He's an inventor, innovator, entrepreneur. He's like the greatest entrepreneur that you've never heard of. He was Elon Musk's boss at PayPal. He funded first institutional investor in Facebook. He has his hand in everything regarding technology and innovation. And I was listening to this interview with him, and he said, or the interview asked him, what is wrong with innovation today? Has it stagnated? And Peter Thiel said, Yeah, it's absolutely stagnated, just like society has stagnated, just like families have stagnated, just like people have stagnated. And it all comes back to the same issue. It's the same answer for all those problems. And I thought, holy smokes, what is happening on this small podcast? I'm going to get the answer to all of this. So I put in both headphones, stopped working for a minute, and I was just ready to eat up everything he was going to say. And he said the problem with all these things, with innovation, with individuals, with families, with society, with the United States, is that we have inverted priorities. He said that we have the first and last commandment completely inverted. The first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And the last commandment, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. He distilled it down saying, we have these inverted. God says, look to me for what you should want, what you should have, and what you should do. And then the last, he says, don't look at your neighbor for what you should have, what you should want, what you should do. But instead we have it completely inverted. Instead of looking to God for those things, we're looking at our neighbor. We're looking at other people who are also being manipulated, who also are full of dross, just like we are. And we're saying, that's what I should want, that's what I should have, that's what I should do. And he's saying, that is the problem with society today. It is the mark of a fallen society. It is part of the slope down to a fallen kingdom. And the reason I bring this all to your attention is because if you don't understand it, if you don't know what's happening, you can't do anything about it. And like I said, money, finance, that's just one attack vector. That's just one way that we can distort the truth. And it has been distorted. That's just one way that people can manipulate, and we have been manipulated. So, what do we do? Next week, we're going to talk about what is the currency in the kingdom of God. It will be more, I'm still going to present my theory and all these things, but it will definitely be more of a discussion. So please think about what you believe could be the currency in the kingdom of God, and we'll talk about it. Thanks.